This from Brian. Given the complicated defense we run, how much concern is there that some of these portal transfers will have problems picking up the intricacies of the defense in their first year in the system? So let me start this answer by talking about Jeffrey Bassa. That is Oregon's most important returner defensively. He may not be the most impactful player for the Ducks defensively this year. He'll be one of them. But will he be the singularly most important person and the most statistically glaring player on Oregon's defense this year? Probably not. He'll be one of the leading tacklers, but will he lead the team in sacks or TFLs? No, I do not expect him to. And I expect him to have a good year. He was second team All Pac-12 a year ago and another year in the system. I think he can have a fantastic year and make himself into an NFL draft pick after this season. But the reason he's so important is because, as you mentioned, the defense can be a little bit complicated. Every defense has got complicated elements to it. I don't know all the inner workings and whether, Lanning and Lupoy's defense, and you got to put Chris Hampton in that conversation as well, and the play calls and how they get stuff in. I don't know if it's any more complicated than another team's defense. It could be. Lanning's defensive guy. He certainly spent more time thinking about, innovation and plays and concepts and coverages and schemes on that side of the ball than offense. So you'd think there'd be a little bit more to it. That doesn't mean that everything on the offense is just simple compared to what you have on the defensive side of things, though. So I think Bosa is huge because he does understand the system. He's been in it for the last couple of years at the linebacker position. And he's going to be the guy who's getting the plays relayed into him from the coaching staff. And I presume that'll be Tosh Lupoy getting things in. There's a collaborative component to it to send the play calls in. But Jeffrey Bassa is the guy who is the quarterback of the defense. He's getting everyone situated. He knows what the calls. Hey, they give us this look. We got to shift into this coverage. Or, hey, this is an automatic blitz if they motion this guy here. All that sort of stuff. That's running through Jeffrey Bassa. So that's why he's the most important guy for Oregon's defense this year, even more than, say, Jordan Birch, who might put up better numbers from a sack or tackle for loss standpoint than Jeffrey Bassa will this year. So I think having him there is really, really big. And that helps incorporate the new guys that are working their way in and learning the different calls and the signals and the coverages and everything like that. I think for the transfers coming in, I don't have a big concern about how they're going to learn the defense, especially having a guy like Jeff Bosa there and several other returners too, but mostly Bosa. I don't worry about, are they going to pick this up or they're going to be coverage busts or anything like that. I think the guys that have the most to learn will be Kobe Savage, Kansas State transfer, expected to start at free safety. At least that's what I would certainly project right now for Oregon's defense. And Brandon Johnson, the nickel. Because those are two guys coming into a new situation, and they've got more to learn. Like, if you compare what you need to learn defensively at a defensive back position compared to what you have to learn, say, on the defensive line, I do not believe the defensive linemen's assignments are nearly as complex because they're not, they're obviously talking about gap assignments and shifting coverages or shifting, run fits and everything like that with the linebackers. Like, they have things to communicate and understand, like, hey, I've got outside container. I've got to rush with discipline going to get the quarterback, or I've got to swallow up a double team, or I've got to stunt here. There are things, but it's not nearly as complicated because they're not really affected by motion. So guys on the back end of the defense, they're affected by motion, which is, of course, a big trend in football right now, understandably so, because data and analytics tell you the more you motion, the more confused the defense is going to be, and the more success you are likely to have on the offensive side of the football when you use any sort of motion in a play. It's why you see Oregon motion a pretty good amount. So I think for Savage and Johnson, who I expect to start this year, I think Oregon's starting safeties will be Kobe Savage, Tysheem Johnson, and then Brandon Johnson at the nickel spot. I think those guys have the most to learn, to understand how the calls work, how you pass things off, and what their zone assignments are and the key indicators and everything like that. They've got the most to learn. Whereas Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, It's much more about, hey, show up and just kick the other guy's rear end, push him around, move him off the line of scrimmage. I think that's a lot simpler compared to what you have on the back end of that defense. And the other thing too with that, like I think that's a really good question. I think the other thing too is there are so many new faces in Oregon safety room. Like Tysheem Johnson is the only guy that is back from last year's unit. That's a huge difference. No Steve Stevens, no Evan Williams in there. And I don't know if Tysheem was as much the field general that, Evan Williams or really Steve Stevens was. And I don't know who fills that role. My guess would be Kobe Savage because he's playing, that deep safety or, field safety, however you want to refer to it. That's a guy who's probably the last defender. Like if you have a cover 3 call, for instance, your field safety or your deep safety is going to be the guy that takes that middle third, whereas your boundary safety, your strong safety is a guy who's going to, come up in zone coverage and play kind of that middle third of the field, or drop all the way down the line of scrimmage and take a flat to hook zone, for instance. So I think for Savage, that's a role that he's got to be able to pick up. He's got to be able to embrace. And, you heard, I think, other podcasters and coaches and players talk a lot about, what Steve Stevens did on the back end of the secondary. Look, Stevens was an awesome guy, had a long Oregon career, was not the most dynamic playmaker, and was not someone who excelled in coverage. He wasn't bad per se. He was just he was okay. He was solid. But the reason that he was really on the field is because he was a field general back there, because he knew what everyone needed to do and could make the right calls and get into the coverage and everything like that. All the little details and intangibles. I think that's a role that Kobe Savage has to embrace. And there are a bunch of other guys that have to be ready to fill in. I mean, you saw Savage get hurt in the spring game going to make a tackle on Jordan James, which, that's something that can happen. James is one heck of a physical runner, as we all know. But if Savage goes down, my question for the back end of this Oregon defense is who steps into that spot? Who's your next deep safety? Is it Aaron Flowers? Is it Tyler Turner maybe? Is it, I don't know, Kingston Lopa, the true freshman? I don't know. I don't know. That's, I think, a legitimate question on this Oregon defense is how well can the safety room potentially survive an injury, even for just, a play or two? Or is it Peyton Woodyard, who, as Brian Smith has talked about, and he said kind of the same things about Aaron Flowers. I think Flowers has got a little bit more game readiness in terms of his coverage skills than Woodyard does, but neither one is taking a snap in a college game, and someone's going to have to play. Someone's going to have to play. I think that's the biggest question for this Oregon defense right now. Who's the number 2 free safety? I don't think anyone's going to dispute that Kobe Savage is number 1. It could be an open battle right now for all we know. And heck, who's your number 2? Or did I say boundary safety? I don't know. I think about them as free and strong safety. So that's the way I'm going to refer to them. Who is your number 1? Who's your number 2 free safety? Who's your number 2 strong safety? Tysheem is your top strong safety. Who's behind him? Is that a Flowers? Is that a Woodyard? Is that a Tyler Turner? I think Turner's a little bit more of a free safety, and the other two project maybe a little bit more as strong safeties. But it's why when I was talking on yesterday's show about potential transfers that Oregon could add, a depth piece at free safety could absolutely be a play unless they feel that one of those young guys are ready. And look, they get recruited to Oregon to play eventually. And sometimes you got to just learn on the job. So maybe that'll be a reality for Oregon secondary this year. It's definitely the aspect of the defense I feel the least confident about. I think the corners go several guys deep. I think the linebacker depth is okay. I think the defensive line depth is freaking awesome. I think that free safety and strong safety depth, not sure. Nickel depth, really good because you can put corners there. Solomon Davis, that's another guy to keep in mind. He's made the position change I heard on the Odds and Audibles podcast, and Max Torres has talked about it as well, that he's made a position change from corner to safety. So maybe that's a guy who's on the depth chart over the top. I don't know. But I am more than a little fascinated to see how that position group plays out. But really, really important for those guys to understand the scheme and be able to communicate effectively, like you said. Because in 2022, I think we saw a couple of coverage busts. I think there were several, and it can take time. And Jeffrey Bassa has talked about that as well, that, hey, my first year in the system compared to my second, did not have as great of an understanding, and now I do. And guess what? He was a much better player because of it. He transformed his body, but he also was really, really diligent in learning all the nuances of this defense. And now I think he knows it inside and out. So, love that question. Still a couple more questions to get to, including one that, frankly, as I record this show, I don't have an answer to yet.